Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you again so much for being here. My name is Cheryl Babin. I'm a designer of professional learning at the Calgary Regional Consortium. I'm very grateful for you to either attend today or join us on the recording. Either way, we're grateful for your time and thankful that you have chosen to come to learn a little bit more about what we are going to do with all of the cusps, the knowledge, understanding, skills, and procedures, and how we can really bring them into some engaging learning for students in today's world. So I'd just like to welcome you and let you know that you can access all of today's slides using the link that is attached to the screen. And for those of you that are here with me, I'll post that into the chat for easy access for you. And you can also use the QR code if you'd like to access it that way. So I'll just give you a moment to grab a link to the slides. Thanks, Terry. Nice to see you here. Glad for the note. Everyone, you're welcome to jump in by turning off your mics, or turning on your mics rather, if you feel that you'd like to do so, but also know that it's okay to just listen as you're doing other things. So welcome, Nadine. Thank you. So I wanted to just give you information about myself. All of my contact information is here on slide 2. And we at the Calgary Regional Consortium are a proud member of the Alberta Regional Professional Development Consortia across the province. Calgary is one of 7 consortia, and together we are really working hard to do our best to support teachers in all of the dynamic and interesting ways that you work so that we can all benefit the students in our care. Okay, so before we get into it, it's really important that I spend a moment talking about our land acknowledgement today. So for those with me in our space today who are not Indigenous, and particularly for those who are white settlers as myself, I believe it's our responsibility to create space and dedicate time to understand our history deeply so that we may be acutely aware of how it continues to affect Indigenous people today. Not only must we take care of the land on which we live, play, and work, but acknowledgement that the lands we are on are rightfully belong to the Indigenous people is the first step to honoring them and working towards meaningful action and reconciliation. With that, I believe it's important to say that we're gathered here today. I'm coming to you from an important and sacred place within the Treaty 7 and the traditional territories of the Nitsappi from the Blackfoot Confederacy, including the Siksika, Piikani, and the Kainai nations, the Hare Nakota of the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley nations, and the Dene of the Tsuut'ina Nation. Southern Alberta is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. All right, so I'm going to pose a question to you to start, and recognizing that some of you will be watching this recording, I won't wait too long for your response. So the question is, what do these have in common? Imagine that the first little sticky note here on the bulletin board says, design a playground that can include all of our grades of students at the same time. Present your plan at the assembly. The second note card or sticky note says, what is the most dangerous natural climate event? Prove it. And the third is, write about the best birthday celebration imaginable. Use data collected from your friends. What might these things have in common? If you are here with me, I'd love for you to either turn on your mics or possibly throw an idea out in the chat. I'll just give you a moment to think about that. What might these have in common? You might notice that they all would engage students in a variety of different types of critical thinking opportunities. Thank you. We have one comment in the chat. They're engaging, probably personally relevant, challenging, open-ended, and they make you really think. Yeah, thank you for that. All of these things are definitely meant to be engaging to students, They also, if you notice, have the opportunity to cross boundaries of discipline, so they can sort of connect into different subject areas. And they would really activate and capitalize on different skills and competencies that we can develop in our students. So in all of these tasks, there's something in common, and I want to lean on the incredible wisdom of Dr. Shelley Moore by linking those 3 tasks into something really meaningful with Shelley Moore's video, Curriculum Dreaming. And so, thank you, Terry. You can also not Google those things, absolutely. So I hope you can enjoy this video. It's 5 minutes long, and we will be using this to springboard into our next learning experience. So here we go.
Welcome to 5 More Minutes, useful videos in 5 minutes or less that support the teaching and learning of all students. I'm your host, Shelley Moore. Today's episode is called California Dreaming. Nope, just kidding. Curriculum Dreaming. Okay, curriculum, you know the stuff. It's all the goals and learning outcomes that society tells us we need to teach to the children. What I didn't realize was that it is really important to not just know the goals in the curriculum, I also needed to know how those goals in the curriculum were organized. Now, if you aren't totally immersed in education, you may not be super familiar with curriculum models and organization. But let's compare this to something that we might be more familiar with. I want you to think about the self-help book sections that support us to become our best selves. In many of these books, there are great strategies. There's one that's referred to that's considered a habit of a highly effective person. That strategy is called keeping the end in mind, or in education is called backwards design. Okay, so here's the idea. You will have a better chance of meeting a goal if you A, know what the goal is, and B, if you make a plan to meet it before you start. So for example, if I had a goal to go to California one day, because everyone has a goal to go to California one day, the chances of me getting there will be way higher if I know where I'm going, when I'm going, how I'm getting there, where am I going to stay, how am I getting home. You quickly start to see how important the plan is if you want to meet a goal. But you also realize that there's multiple answers to these questions. In life and in education, there can be multiple pathways to the same goal, which is great. And it makes it responsive to the person who's trying to meet the goal. This is a much more effective strategy than, say, if I, for example, just decided to leave my house in Vancouver and just start walking north, hopefully finding my way to California. Backwards design is a strategy used every day, and it ranges from travel goals to weight loss goals. It's also used in many curricular organization models. But here's the thing, this is not a linear process, and backwards design is trying to aim to be responsive to the person meeting the goal. But curriculum is often interpreted as the opposite, very linear and not responsive. It's totally standardized. How I used to think about curriculum was like this. Curriculum is in a giant, big red binder, and in September, I start on page 1. And when I'm done with page 1, I move to page 2. And then I get to June 20th, and I have 147 pages left. Well, what if I told you there's another way to read curriculum that better aligns with backwards design big ideas? I want you to imagine that the curriculum is still a book, but the book is not a binder. It's a flip book. Do you remember these books? I love these books. The flip book, it's still the same for everyone, but how it's read depends on who is reading it. There are many ways to read the same flip book. So to make sense of this for curriculum, the first thing we need to do is understand what the pages of the flip book are. These pages represent the different types of goals in the curriculum. In British Columbia, we have 3 kinds of goals. We have content goals. These are the goals about knowledge. We have curricular competency goals, and these are the goals about skills and processes. And we have core competency goals. And these are cross-curricular goals that support the development of the people that we need to become so that we can be contributing members of the world. All of these goals are organized around a big idea. And these are the things we need to understand. Although the book is the same for everyone, the flip book pages we choose can reflect the kids we are teaching and can be responsive to both their strengths and their stretches. As educators, backwards design helps us to keep the end in mind by deciding what the goals are for a unit and how we can teach them in responsive ways that allow students to reach these goals in multiple ways. I think this calls for some professional development in California. Okay, teachers, parents, students, if you're watching this video, I want you to go find your local curriculum and I want you to look at how it's organized. If you're not in British Columbia, these goals might be called different things, but you will probably find that there's a lot of similarities. And then I want you to think about how we can start to translate these goals to students and families so that they can see what they're learning because they're the ones who are meeting the goals. They also need to know why we're going to California. Okay, teachers, here's your job. And do this together. Number 1, I want you to go choose some goals that reflect your students' needs. Number 2, I want you to make a plan with multiple pathways so that all kids can meet those goals. And number 3, I want you to share those goals with students and families so that they know what the plan is. So that was our episode, Curriculum Dreaming. Head on over to the website to see some examples of plans and stay tuned for the video strategy about backwards design coming soon. Don't forget to subscribe to the email and the YouTube channel and the podcast so that you don't miss any content. I'll see you soon, friends.
All right. So thank you, Shelley Moore. She's quite amazing, isn't she? And so what I wanted
Welcome to 5 more.
Let's just move on to here. I wanted to take a look at our Alberta context and the architecture of the curriculum. As Shelley has indicated, it's really important for us to understand the organization of this structure, how our curriculum is meant to be engaged with and how we might come to understand how best to get students to their targets and to their goals. And so many of you have probably already seen this architecture and this spiraling of organizing ideas at the top, followed by guiding questions, the learning outcomes, which are the pieces in which we are responsible to assess and report out on, and the knowledge, understanding, skills, and procedures that inform and make up those learning outcomes. Those are often called cusps as a nickname. And within that, and sort of underlaying the foundation of that, we have literacy, numeracy, and competencies that are on continuums that show how we can grow and develop over time. So with these in mind, it's really important for us to take a close look at the curriculum to see how the key concepts and those big ideas are embedded. These help provide the context and the connections for the facts and skills that live within. So for example, and I know this big magnifying glass is on top here, when we look at the physical education and wellness curriculum, for example, I've located a spot here that has got the, that has this magnifying glass over the grade 4 and 5 outcomes. And you can see that within this organizing idea of healthy relationships, personal well-being is supported through positive relationships built on communication, collaboration, empathy, and respect. And so when we think about pulling some concepts there, we know that relationship is a concept, conflict is a concept, the idea of identity and belonging is a concept, and even the concept of health can be looked at through the lens of causation, cause and effect. So all of these key concepts can really help us to develop an understanding of what the big ideas are for the curriculum. So let's take some of those key concepts and then think about, all right, then, what would the end look like? What would that end in mind be? So here's an example of a student task, one that is similar in its essence to the pieces that were shared with you at the very beginning. Write a persuasive speech that describes why a character is the best candidate for a job posting as best friend. Now, students can have some choice and some ideas where in places where they can decide how they want to reveal that information or their understanding. And you can also articulate things that must be included in this task, as well as some criteria for success that would ideally be co-created with students so that everyone would know what that final product could look like. Now, when we think about how this relates to the key concepts or to those organizing ideas, you can really think that, well, if we look at different examples of friendships and relationships and how conflict is solved, what kinds of empathy or compassion might be present in the storylines, there's all kinds of different things that could happen. We've got forgiveness and challenge proof, lots of different concepts that could look at that. So let's take a look at how we can take that further. I've drawn on the work of James Nottingham and his design of the learning pit, something you've probably seen before, but visit him on his website for some of these great graphics and some opportunities to see how you can use this learning pit. The idea behind this is that in order to really get into deep learning, students and teachers have to kind of play in that pit together, and they have to come to understand something deeply by engaging in problematic situations that make us think about different perspectives, or maybe differences in opinion, those types of things. And so we're going to use this chain of thinking throughout the session today, while keeping in mind that this example of writing a persuasive speech might help us to know how we would build the skills and knowledge of the students in that class. So I'm presenting 3 keys to engaging responsive unit designs. And Shelley Moore talked a lot about it being responsive, and that we have to kind of grow and move with the students as we go. So the 3 things that we'd like to talk about today are starting with the end in mind, which would be the critical challenge. The term critical challenge comes from Garfield Jenny Newman, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. The second key to engaging responsive unit designs is to create clusters of cusps that will help to empower your students to complete that critical challenge. So just to remember that the cusps I'm referring to are the knowledge, understanding, skills, and procedures outlined by the curriculum that you can access on New Learn Alberta. The third engaging way to design responsive units is to create lines of inquiry to guide your process. And I'll explain what a line of inquiry is just shortly. All right, so I want you to imagine that the design of how students will apply their learning is not done as the dessert that happens after. Let me make that even more clear. We want to make sure that we know the end in mind is going to result in some sort of a product or a performance or a conversation, possibly all of those things combined. And the design of that task will reveal the learning evidence that we are looking for. So we know if students have achieved the learning outcome that we have identified and we have built toward. And so it's important that we don't just get to the end of the meal and then look into the fridge and say, what's for dessert? But rather, we need to plan for that experience to happen in a different way. The critical challenge, or it's sometimes called a performance task, or maybe you just call it a project. It's not just introduced at the end like a dessert, but rather it becomes the invitation to the journey. Sharing out the challenge becomes an invitation at the beginning of the learning cycle so that students can use what they learn to engage along the way. So imagine it like that train where they are learning at each stop and they're adding to the whole idea of that critical challenge or that performance. So here's the 2 models again. The first is the dessert at the end model, where you just go through and you design, as Shelley was saying, page 1, page 2, page 3. We're just going through the lessons that you might design according to the cusps, and then trying to figure out, okay, what are we going to do to show what they know? Maybe it's a test, but maybe it's a product of some sort. That's one way to do it. But I'm suggesting that you introduce that critical challenge or that project idea at the beginning, and then going on the journey, then you dip into a little bit of the things that you need to learn about through that inquiry where you're like, okay, well, wait a second, what's a persuasive speech? We better find out how to do some persuasive writing. What makes a good friend? How do we know what those qualities are? So through this journey, you are learning and then adding a little bit more onto your product. How are you building your persuasive speech, or how are you designing that throughout the course of the learning? You use what you learn as you go to add, change, adjust, build, refine, and revise. And this is a much more authentic way of including those cusps into the learning with the goal of that final project at the end that you are building as you go, not waiting till the end. So starting with the end in mind, here's the critical challenge. A critical challenge is something that invites students to apply and demonstrate their learning with consideration for some sort of authentic purpose or audience. So you can think about it as though, so what product or performance will help them really reveal evidence of their learning? All of the upcoming learning experiences that come from that will allow students to dig deeper into the important aspects necessary for meeting the challenge. At this point, I want to pause and show how the First People's Principles of Learning, and the source for this resource is listed on the slide, how this is a way of really thinking about pedagogy and curriculum and teaching and learning in a way in which Indigenous peoples might consider learning. And so when we look specifically at how, for example, learning is holistic, reflexive, reflective, experiential, and relational, it means that they have to dig into that learning and have some experiences, have a chance to reflect on it. Wow, is this a good friend? Is this a good persuasive writing? What are some techniques that I can use to make this better? How do I grow this and talk to people around me and be connected to the work in a meaningful way? There's other things in Principles of Learning from First Peoples, like recognizing the consequences of our action, or how learning is embedded in memory, history, and story, and how it evolves and changes with patience and time. And so with all of these in mind, I wanted to consider one of these aspects and ask us that how might we design our units that will create a space for students to be engaged in and experience connection and reflection. And I believe that that is through this model that introduces the challenge at the beginning and then builds on that learning as we go along. The criteria for a critical challenge, according to Garfield Ginny Newman and the Critical Thinking Consortium, is that it allows students to provide useful evidence for assessing the curricular outcomes, the learner outcomes. It's a meaningful purpose for the learning, it's engaging, it encourages the development of competencies such as problem solving and communication and critical thinking and collaboration. And it may involve some innovation and some risk taking. We want them to not only just show what they know and can do, but we want them to transfer that learning and do something with it. And so this is how. Now this choice board, if you will, has been provided to us by Garfield Ginny Newman, and he talks about 6 ways that you might be able to frame a critical thinking prompt or challenge. And so these 6 ways are decoding the puzzle, judging something to be better or best, performing to specs, critiquing a piece, reworking a piece, or designing it to specs. And with these different ways to frame a critical thinking prompt, I've provided you with some examples of how this could work and pull together. So let's go in a little deeper so that you can see how that goes. So if we were to use the idea of decoding a puzzle, in this way, students suggest and justify a proposed solution, an explanation, or an interpretation to a confusing situation. So here are a couple of examples. Design a playground that can fit all of our grades of students at the same time. Rather than having this rotating schedule, how can we design a playground that could actually give space for everyone to play? That is a confusing situation or a problem that needs to be solved. What is the most dangerous natural climate event? Okay, so that is, the puzzle is there. We have to figure out which one is the most dangerous. We need to learn about different ones. What is the best stack of picture books for our grade 1 readers? Let's say we wanted to give them some recommended resources, but we need to know, okay, we need to put the best ones together. It also, you can see that there's similarities to judging something as better or best. Oftentimes we look at creating open-ended challenges that include lots of right answers. But this is a nuance that I find really useful, because students have to form an opinion. They have to provide evidence and they have to back up what they say. It doesn't actually matter what they prefer or what they think is better or best. It's really about how sound the response is to their ideas. So for example, what combination of materials creates the strongest barrier against water? Some of those might actually be right or wrong, right? But the idea is that they would have to test different combinations and try them all out and be a judge about it. Maybe they have to take a look at our current grade 6 social studies. Which form of democracy worked better, ancient Athens or the Iroquois Confederacy? So they need to know both deeply and then judge one better than the other. Is one's quality of life better in a rural or an urban setting? You can take a look at the geographic areas of Canada. You can take a look at how natural resources are provided, how a sense of belonging comes into a community. So these types of questions can really embed the learning outcomes into the work. Here's another one where we look at designing to specs. So students develop a product that meets a given set of criteria or conditions. Design and build a terrarium that can grow local plants. Lots of things that you need to know about in order to be able to achieve that task. Create a piece of art that meets the criteria of your friend's favorite art forms. Or write about the best birthday celebration imaginable. Use data collected from your friends. Sometimes you could also tweak that a little bit and have them perform something to specs. So they undertake a course of action that meets a certain set of criteria. So create a 3-minute speech that persuades us to do something. Use what you know about the qualities of a good friend. You can see our job posting example here. Or design an enclosure for goats, horses, and chickens according to their needs. So knowing exactly what each of those might need. Critiquing a piece is another way that you can create a critical challenge that would incorporate multiple outcomes and cusps. And there's a couple of examples here. Identifying the best Picasso work of art according to the criteria, or maybe provide your judgment and your explanation for the best allergen-free school snack. Create a menu to share with the community. So there's lots of different ways that you can do this. Reworking a piece is another great idea. So if you think about visiting a local museum or a virtual one as well, and understand what an exhibit is trying to do to teach the audience, and then ask students to recreate their own that could do something even better. Or you can redesign your ride to school to make it faster, more comfortable, and more energy efficient. So you can give them challenges like that as a reworking of the piece. I know that there's great tasks that you've been doing in your own classes. So at this point, you're welcome to use the chat or turn on your mics to share some of the interesting performance tasks or critical challenges that you've maybe used with your classes over the years. The chat is open if you would like to add those in. While you're thinking about those, I want to go back to our learning pit and the student task about writing a character job posting as best friend. It's really important that everyone in the class knows what the criteria for success would be when you're creating this critical challenge. So take the time to co-create that criteria with students. As you work through the unit, you'll make sure that you're aligning that evidence with the details as you go, and it's informing the steps that you need to know in terms of how best to support your students as you go, which we'll really talk about during session 2 of this series next week. I'd like to move now into creating clusters of cusps that will empower your students to complete the critical challenge. Before I jump into that, I want to thank our contributors to the chat. Grade 1 building, incorporating social studies and math. Excellent. How might we design the space around the Airdrie Water Tower? This was a current local topic, and you met with a counselor to present it. Fabulous. That's an absolutely stunning example. I hope that went really well, and I can imagine how many learning outcomes you were able to incorporate into that engaging task. Thank you for sharing. Absolutely. All right, so now the important part about that is, so if you've got this great idea about designing the space around the water tower, or it, sometimes it could be a big project like that, but also you can see that the job posting could be done in a little bit at a time over the course of the learning, and you could add to it and change it. So maybe you're doing different drafts as you go through, but it doesn't have to be a huge, enormous project. It just needs to be something that really incorporates the learning in some way. And so now I really want to talk about how to cluster those cusps and to help pull it all together. This is a slide that I used in another session that was called Help, School Feels Too Busy for Learning. And I imagine that in this background on the map there, that each of these sections or communities is like a section of learning outcomes, and all of the cusps are the little roadways and lines in between. And sometimes as teachers, we just feel like we're running on this treadmill and we're trying to keep the students with us as we go in all of these different directions, jumping from community to community or lesson to lesson. Here's some math and some learning. Now we're going to jump over to ELAL and do some more learning. So what I would like to suggest is that we think about clustering our cusps into a collection of a task or a critical challenge that pulls some of those subjects together. We need to be efficient and we need to be creative in order to be able to do this well. So imagine a flower bouquet where you've got each of those different pieces or species of plants represents a different subject or discipline. And so, for example, you might create something that includes science and language and math. And so let's just break that down and show how that could look. So here's a different example of an engaging and efficient task design. Students in grade 6 will design an informative display / performance or exhibit, lots of room for choice in there for students, for the Mayor's Expo that will inform the people of Calgary about the impact of climate change on Earth, specifically in our Alberta context. Okay, so now I went into Learn Alberta and I'm pulling out some learning outcomes that could be uncovered through the design of this task. You can see that I have some roses, which are representing science in this bouquet metaphor. Students investigate climate changes in climate and the impact of climate change on Earth, and they investigate characteristics and components of ecosystems. So I pulled 2 different outcomes from science. For English language arts and literature, they interpret and respond to text through the application of comprehension strategies. We look at how vocabulary enhances communication and provides clarity. We're looking to reflect personal voice and style through creative and critical thinking processes. But that's not it. All of these couldn't even fit on one slide. So we have some more. We've got more ELAL. Students connect the quality and efficacy of oral communication to oral language skills. And then finally, we can add some math into that by students investigating relative frequency using experimental data. So they can use some of that learning into the essence of this task in the middle of it all before they go to the expo with their final product. And the great part about this way of thinking is that when you pull and you cluster all of these different subjects and learning outcomes together, we're actually doing even more and an even better job of helping to build competencies. And if you see the little square at the bottom, when we do this, we are asking them to be critical thinkers. We're asking them to manage information and to consider different aspects of the competencies as we go. And the best way to do that is to really look at pulling those all together. All right, so back to our learning pit. At the beginning, when we decide on what that critical challenge might look like, we need to articulate what the success looks like. And we have to think about, all right, well, what kinds of things do we need to do to be able to feel successful? So whether it was the Mayor's Expo or coming back to the example of writing a speech, a persuasive speech about the kind of character that would be the best friend, you have to know all of the things that would need that to be successful. And so this is done into the moment of the pitch. And when we're in this place, we can think of, well, what types of experiences will reveal that learning? And will we read a novel together? Will we bring in different kinds of literature so that students can explore relationships and conflict and empathy? Will we choose different elements to have them graph some of the data that they can collect? Will they interview each other? Will they have debates and critical conversations about the content that we are uncovering? And so through practicing all of these types of things, we need to start to put all of these ideas together in some way, because we know that inside the brain of a teacher, we've got certain aspects of learning outcomes, and wondering if, can I include the quick writes to model and practice some strategies? How can you be really persuasive as an exit ticket one day? Oh, we want to go and see, we want to see a performance, and I've got to do this field trip in these forms. There's all these different pieces that are bouncing around in the minds of teachers. You want to be able to relate ideas and connect paragraphs. Or you notice that some of them need help with transitions, and you've got all these questions. So how do we sort all of this out? How do we make sense of it? And that's probably why you came today. So here's one idea, and I hope it will work for you. At the beginning of this design, and it can look in many different forms, but we've created what could look like a little bit of a map. And so the initial idea for an engaging task or challenge would go at the top. And then you just start to think about what kinds of learning outcomes and the main cusps that would connect to this, and try to draw on more than one subject. And this is where you would dig into your into the curriculum to read and understand, particularly as we're all new in uncovering the depths of what our new curriculum looks like on new Learn Alberta, and also a place to sort of put in other ideas where you're blending. What kinds of guest speakers could you bring in? What kinds of experiences might really enliven or rich and make that learning more rich? And so this is an example of something that you could use to try to organize those thoughts. And once you get into the new Learn Alberta site, one of my favorite features about it is when you hover over the green learning outcomes, you get a little eye for an information icon. If you click on it, you get a flyout. And the flyouts are great because it gives you access to the organizing ideas, the guiding questions that can help to hook you into different lessons. And then the learning outcome will open up so that you can see all of the knowledge, understanding, skills, and procedures, as well as the competencies and the progressions that we talked about. And so there's a link there to show you how to get there. When you open up all of those cusps, if you will, now we can start to circle or highlight or capture the important ones, and they're all important and need to be addressed, but we want to cluster them together in logical sequences so that we can be efficient and we use them in engaging ways. So if we were thinking about our same task, we would be able to look at how our perspectives and our behaviors are influenced by our experiences. When we're looking at literature, we would compare and contrast perspectives of main and supporting characters. We would analyze the feelings of characters in stories, problems on the playground, and also in the context of building all of these things. So in one or two lessons, we can actually pull some of those cusps together in a way that can be really relevant and connected. I want to leave a little bit of space to see if anyone has questions or comments that they want to add. Please make sure you let me know. I'm happy to stop or and speak to any questions that are coming up. During this time, when you're pulling out the learning outcomes and the cusps, this is what's actually happening during your time in the pit, so to speak. What learning really needs to take place in there. And so if we know that writing a persuasive speech is the goal, then what I'm going to just pop out here so that I can type into this for us. Oops. Oh, my escape button's always sticky. That happens to me every time. Okay, so when we get in here, we know that we need to know, students are going to need to understand what a persuasive speech would be, right? They would also want to know the qualities of a good friend, maybe looking at managing conflict. Sorry for the typing, in relationships. Too much pressure. And there's many other things that could be incorporated into that. How to collect data for research, analyzing a character in a novel, many, many different things could be incorporated into that learning kit. So from there, then we would go to the third part of this session today, which is about creating lines of inquiry to try to guide that process. And so I'm going to use a baseball analogy. And the idea here is that we know that at the end of this learning, they're going to be writing this persuasive speech and really thinking about the character qualities of a good friend. So in doing so, we're going to need to go out into the world. The world would be the learning or the line of inquiry. And we're going to be doing some mini lessons, some specific learning, some digging into something. Okay, so imagine that each batter is going out to first base and learning a little bit about persuasive writing as a type, and then playing with some persuasive language, identifying which text is more persuasive than another, what were the qualities of that, and then coming back to home plate. Well, this whole sort of home run, if you will, is meant to help us go learn a little bit more about persuasive writing. And then we come back and we can look at our critical challenge again, and we will feel like, okay, I really understand now what persuasive writing is. Now I have to be able to apply that. So then the next time we go out to create another line of inquiry or another round at bat, if you will, we're going to be looking at the character qualities that really display empathy, for example. And we'll look at all of the different samples and we'll learn what empathy is, and we'll create it in a Freire model, and we will analyze characters in several different picture books and a couple of chapter books, and we'll talk about empathy. We'll interview someone about what it means to be empathetic and how that works. And all of that would be considered a line of inquiry that would help to unpack some of that understanding and can then add into our critical challenge. And so I'm going to just ask this question, and I know we have a small group here with us live, but many of you may remember learning a little bit about Shrek. So here's an example of how I might create a bit of a learning line of inquiry connected to this critical challenge. So let's just watch a short little clip of Shrek and Donkey, and we'll try to decide if Shrek is a good friend. Okay, so that's the question.
You there, Ogre? Aye. By the order of Lord Farquaad. You there, Ogre? Aye. By the order of Lord Farquaad, I am authorized to place you both under arrest and transport you to a designated resettlement facility. Oh, really? You in what army? Can I say something to you? Listen, you was really, really something back there. Incredible. Are you talking to me? Well, yes, I was talking to you. And I just tell you that you was really great back then, man. Those guards, they thought they was all of that. Then you showed up and bam, they was tripping over themselves like babes in the woods. See that? That really made me feel good to see that.
Oh, that's great. Really?
Man, it's good to be free.
Now, why don't you go celebrate your freedom with your own friends?
But I don't have any friends.
and I'm not going out there by myself.
Hey, wait a minute, I got a great idea. I'll stick with you.
You're a mean green fighting machine. Together we'll scare the spit out anybody that crosses us. Ah! That was really scary. And if you don't mind me saying, if that don't work, your breath certainly will get the job done, because you definitely need some Tic Tacs or something, because your breath stinks. Man, you almost burned the hair out my nose. Just like the time. And then I ate some rotten berries. Man, I had some strong gases eking out of my butt that day.
Why are you following me?
I'll tell you why. 'Cause I'm all alone. There's no one here beside me. My problems have all gone. There's no one to deride me. But you gotta have friends.
Stop singing! Well, it's no wonder you don't have any friends.
Only a true friend would be that cruelly honest.
Listen, little donkey, take a look at me. What am I?
Really tall?
No, I'm an ogre. You know, grab your torch and pitchforks. Doesn't that bother you?
Nope.
Really?
Without getting lost in Shrek forever, I want to just offer that by giving students a little bit of a snapshot and an opportunity to think critically about the qualities of a good friend, you could use a launch like this or a question on a dashboard. Now, this idea also comes from Garfield Ginny Newman, and he would pose like, well, is Shrek a good friend or not? And so students would then grab a happy face, or maybe that you put this on the wall in your classroom, and they would have to decide based on the evidence that they saw what they think, where if Shrek is a good friend or not. And then they would have to back it up with evidence. And so as you go through the story, or if you learned a little bit more about a character, maybe it's Augie in the book called Wonder, or maybe it's, you know, over time, you might be able to come back to this question and add ideas back to that answer and see if your opinion has changed, to see what new evidence will cause you to rethink your earlier position. And so this is a possible way to sort of invite students to come into that conversation and be part of the learning in an interesting way. And so following that, when you're starting to think about your lines of inquiry, you could use this tool, which is called an activity map, to try to guide your implementation. And so you can have, your big question, maybe that one is connected to your critical challenge. You would write all of those pieces in, and it just is a way of organizing your outcomes and your cusps so that you can start to pull it together. One line of inquiry about persuasive writing, one line of inquiry over the concept of how friendships and relationships might change over time, or how do you create a feeling of belonging? Maybe all of these are different pieces that you would pull together as you work through that critical challenge along the way. So then the last thing that I want to mention is the idea that when you're designing those lines of inquiry, you're actually engaging in lots of mini experiences that help you to reveal what students know, can do, and understand. And so you want to really triangulate your assessment data and think carefully about which kinds of experiences will really help them. So you know that you're developing reading comprehension by digging into some of that. What opportunities do you have to check for understanding? You're using your observations, you're talking to students about their thoughts and their ideas, and you're capturing maybe some of their oral reading and their products and performances. Perhaps they have opportunities to get feedback from each other. And so when we design this activity map and we think about pulling all those lines of inquiry together, it's really that accountability for the outcomes, but also thinking as an assessor and thinking about the best ways to really reveal understanding, giving students lots of ways to show what they know and how they understand it. So here's a blank example of an activity map that you could use if you like the idea. And so I just want to pause and give you a little bit of space and time to think about how all of that might pull together. Why would I show you a little clip, Shrek clip? Why are we thinking about the end in mind? Coming back to Shelley Moore's ideas about planning. It's not just about the destination, but all of the things that we will do to get there. And also thinking, does every student need to get there in the same way? So a chance for you to turn and talk or pause the video, think about what could work, what challenges you might be facing. And if you want to put something into the chat, you can. Okay, so just circling back to the learning pit. In the learning pit here, this is where that baseball diamond analogy and each of those lines of inquiry helps you to get students closer to a fulsome understanding that's necessary for that critical challenge at the end. So I'm just going to offer an opportunity for you to think about what questions you might have about this idea today, to clustering cusps and pulling them together, using activity maps to plot them out and think about how to be transdisciplinary. This slide deck is editable. So if you are looking at the video sometime this week, or maybe you are here with me and needing some more time to think, that's okay. I want to let you know that you can use these boxes to put in any questions that you might have or ideas that you have about this way of thinking about designing the learning. And next week during our session, we will actually take those questions up and we'll take a look at how we can design those assessment experiences to include all learners. And so how we address the wide range of learners that you have in your classes through this way of processing curriculum and taking it into the learning. And then exciting news, in session number 3 on March 15th, I'm very excited to say that we will have a guest speaker, Sherry Ross, who is from Digital Human Library, who is going to share a wide range of amazing virtual reality and different kinds of exceptional resources that are available to you as teachers, and ways that you can really activate the learning and cluster these cusps and make sure that you're achieving a deep understanding as you go along. So please remember that you can add in any of your questions and ideas, or you can also email me as you go along. And so just before we go today, I want to show you that on our CRC website, on the homepage, if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, you will see a section that looks like this. We have now an on-demand professional development section, which is full of videos and templates and tools and resources that will help you to learn more about new curriculum and many other disciplines and topics within that. So please reach out at any time before we meet again next week. And I thank you for coming, and I'm really grateful for your time. So thanks so much, and have a great evening and week, everyone.